friends, in the series which we are doing on the making of contemporary India from 1950 to 1990s, we will talk about the education, science and technology part 2. In the earlier discussion on education, science and technology, we talked about the kind of problems which India had immediately after independence and how the colonial rule became some sort of an impediment in terms of developments in these sectors. And not only these sectors, but economic growth was another important concern at that point of time, that how India became a poor country from being a very rich country in the 19th and earlier centuries, in the 18th century as well, and how India contributed a lot to the world trade. But because of the continuous drain of wealth by the British, we find that no kind of intervention was made by them in terms of education and science and technology, and whatever intervention was made by the British was only for their own personal benefit, in that sense that wherever there was a requirement where British interest could be served, they made those kinds of improvements in the education sector. Largely when they introduced English, their main intention was to have Indians at the lower administrative levels so that they are able to support the British administration. And not many developments in science and technology were undertaken by them, and whatever developments in science and technology were taken before independence, they were because of the initiatives which were taken by the Indians at that point of time. In the context of the references, Bipin Chandra, Ramchandra Guha, India after independence and India after Gandhi can be referred as general readings. Ashok Parsarthi, Baldev Singh, Science in India, the first 10 years, Exporting MIT, Science, Technology and Nation Building India and Iran, Stuart W. Leslie and Robert Cargon. These are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about the kind of developments which took place in the science and technology sector during immediately after the independence. And these readings, they will provide you some kind of an information about the introduction of the IITs on the background of MIT, and at the same time we also find that all these kinds of developments were very, very important from the Indian point of view, and how one of the readings which with regard to the roles of science and technology in the national development, FC and Eteo et al. They talk about the importance of science and technology and how they play an important role in the national development. And P. Ramarao, Science and Technology in Independent India, Retrospect and Prospect. Govindan Parayil, The Green Revolution in India, a case study of technological change. So all these readings one can refer when one is talking about the development in science and technology during this period. And when one is talking about the developments in science and technology, then how the kind of role which is being played by technology in terms of wealth creation, how it also plays an important role in the improvement of the quality of life, how the real economic growth will also improve when you use technology in daily sphere, and how the changes in society will take place and the national development will also happen. So we find that the role of technology is multiple in nature, and it is not only in the concern of creation of wealth in the economic sphere, but it will also improve the quality of life. It will also lead to the national development. It will also in a way provide some kind of an impetus in the poverty alleviation programs, health sector, agricultural sector, rural development and education, affordable energy, water supply and environmental management. So we find that the role of technology is not limited in only one concern, it is multifarious, and when technology will be applied in the day-to-day affairs, then we will find that various problems which are there in the society, they could also be removed. But at the same time one has also to realize that the role of technology should be limited to that extent that we do not become some slaves of technology. And we also have to keep in mind that environmental management is also very, very important, and technology should not be used to that extent that we are not able to manage the environment in a proper way, and because of which we find that the sustainable development in different sectors is not possible. So definitely technology is important and it plays an important role, but at the same time some kind of a balance is also to be created, keeping in mind the kind of changes which are happening in the society. And we find that during when India becomes independent, so at that point of time some of the scientists like P.C. Mahalanobis, S.S. Bhatnagar, Homi J. Bhabha, they had those kind of organizational and managerial abilities as well, and how they were able to utilize their scientific temper and their abilities so that development in the various sectors could take place. And the political leadership was also providing the kind of administrative and the material support which was needed, so that the task of scientific leadership which was there, and this task of scientific leadership could be fused, and how the scientific and the technological infrastructure could also be developed. So the political leadership as well as the scientists, both of them will work together in such a scenario where both of them they have that kind of a vision, where the scientific temper of people not only develops, but at the same time that infrastructure is also created, where more and more people they come and they become part of this kind of a development, where the problems of India could be addressed. And we also find that in January 1938 Nehru said in a message to the Indian Science Congress that it was science alone that could solve these problems of hunger and poverty, of insanitation and illiteracy, of superstitions and deadening custom and tradition, of vast resources running to waste, of a rich country inhabited by starving people. So the leaders, those who were there with the national movement, they also realized that how science has that kind of a capacity where the problems of hunger and poverty they could be in a way dealt. And we also see that in case of India, how India was lagging in terms of the production of the food grains, and how the introduction of the green revolution in 1960s could solve the problems of India, where we see that bumper crops could be seen year after year because of the introduction of the green revolution technology, where the rich or high yielding varieties of seeds they were being introduced. And at the same time there was a lot of criticism of this kind of an agriculture which created uneven development, that the states where green revolution was introduced they became rich, and on the other hand the states where green revolution could not take place they became poorer. And at the same time there was a lot of criticism with regard to the ecological kind of an impact which green revolution created, where we find that the salination of the soil was there, and usage of more water during this time, and the chemical fertilizers, the way they were being used, they also created infertility of the soil. But one has also to see that India did not have much food grains at that point of time, and their primitive technology was not able to produce enough to meet the rising demand, and how it had to borrow food grains from US and other countries of the world. So that was one of the major problems, and keeping in mind that situation, the green revolution technology was introduced in India. And we find that the view which was there in 1938, it was reiterated in scientific policy resolution which was passed by the Lok Sabha in March 1958, and how it acknowledged the role of science and technology in the economic, social and cultural advancement of the country. So we find that the scientific policy resolution was also in a way receptive to these kinds of ideas, and it acknowledged the role of science and technology, that how science and technology will in a way prove to be some sort of a panacea and how it will in a way remove the impediments which are there in the context of the economic, social and the cultural advancement of the country. And we find that when you are talking about the scientific and the technological growth and development, then how the first national laboratory, the National Physical Laboratory came into operation in January 1947, when the foundation stone was laid. And then you have 17 more national laboratories which came up, and we see that these kind of laboratories, they were focusing on the scientific research, and Nehru himself, he assumed the authority or leadership of CSIR, and so that he would be able to guide in such a manner that the scientific and the technological developments, they take place. And we also find that apart from this, on the basis of the developments which were happening across the world, and the way the MIT, which was the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, on the pattern of that, Indian IITs, they were being established. And when initially it was at Kharagpur, and later at Madras, Bombay, Kanpur and Delhi, we find that these IITs, they were being established. And we also find that a lot of money was in a way pumped into the scientific research, and the government started to have some kind of increased expenditure on the development of IITs and other kinds of infrastructure which was required. And you can see it on the screen as well, that how the budget increased from 1.10 crores in 1948-49 to 85.06 crores in 1965-66, and how people, those who were engaged in scientific and technical sphere, they also increased from 1,88,000 in 1950 to 7,31,500 in 1965. So during this period, we find that how the people, those who are associated in these sectors, and unless the people they have this kind of a desire to engage themselves in such kind of sectors, then it will be very, very tough for any kind of a scientific and technological advancement. So people, they have to have that kind of a mindset, they have to have that kind of a temper where they want to engage themselves in research, so that more and more developments could take place in these sectors. And we also find that when people or when students, they will take up engineering and technological courses, and when they will become part of this kind of a setup, then the enrollment also grew during this time. And this not only happens in the context of the engineering colleges, but even in the case of the students, those who were studying agriculture as well. And in 1950, where you find 2,600 students, now it increased to 14,900 in 1965. So the number of students, those who were engaged in the kind of research, not only in the industrial research but in the agricultural research as well, it also increases during this time. And when you take the kind of developments which were happening in these sectors, we find that the scientific research was also suffering because of certain problems which were there in the setup, in the context of the organization and the management structure of the scientific institutes. And we find that they became more and more bureaucratic and hierarchical in nature, because of which we will find that there was a lot of factionalism and intrigue, and because of which there was a lot of frustration among the people, those who were working in that sector. So, and we also find that in 1950s you have a lot of brain drain, that the people, those who studied in good institutions in India, and they could not find better opportunities in India, and how they went to US and other developed world, where they were absorbed and given high positions, and how IITs over a period of time became some sort of a good brand. And the students, those who passed out from the IITs, they were able to create a lot of wealth in even the developed world where they went to work. And India also realized the issue or the importance of the nuclear energy, and how when you will have this kind of an energy where some kind of a global revolution has to be brought about, and it will also be very, very important in the context of the defense capabilities as well. And we find that in August 1948 the government of India set up the Atomic Energy Commission, and Homi J. Bhabha, India's leading nuclear scientist, as chairman in the Department of Scientific Research to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. And in 1954 government created a separate department of atomic energy under PM with Homi Bhabha as secretary. So the government also made certain efforts, and various departments in different spheres they were being created. So, and scientists they also got involved, so that they were able to carry out these exercises in a very systematic manner. And we find that nuclear reactor in India in Bombay also, which was the first in India, it became critical in August 1956, and how various nuclear plants they were to be set up to produce electricity in a few years time. So that was the motto, that how the nuclear energy was to be used in such a manner that it was not for war or for violent purposes. And so thereafter we find that India was committed to the peaceful uses of nuclear power, and its nuclear capacity could easily have been used to produce atomic weapons, but even then the focus of India was in the context of using the nuclear capacity or nuclear energy in that way where it is not used for producing any kind of atomic weapons. We also find that in 1948 before the Constituent Assembly, a statement on the industrial policy of the government of India was also placed, and later it was also adopted in the form of a resolution by the Lok Sabha in 1956. And the government policy on the import of technology and foreign investment was stated in the Constituent Assembly of India legislative in 1949. So all these kinds of issues they were being discussed in the Constituent Assembly, and the members of the Constituent Assembly they were discussing and debating on these kinds of aspects, and later the Parliament also took up, or Lok Sabha also took them up, so that some kind of a primacy could be given to the development of the industrial potential, and various kinds of bodies they were being created so that these institutes and laboratories they can lay the foundation of a strong India which was dependent on science and technology. And we find that when these kinds of institutes they were being created, then the younger generation, especially the young men and women, they were being they took admissions there, they were being trained in this kind of industrial research during this period, and how when this kind of a research activity would be undertaken, then the production methods they could be improved by employing the new techniques, and because of which we will find that the modernization definitely would take place, and this modernization definitely will over a period of time would provide them an opportunity where the industrial growth would also take place. Apart from the developments in the industrial sector or in the nuclear energy, we also find that in the communications as well developments were made in India, and how radio broadcasting was initiated in 1927, and it became the state responsibility only in 1930, and in 1947 it was given the name of All India Radio, and since 1957 it has been called Akashvani. And apart from that, later we also find that not only in the radio but also in the television, where you have Doordarshan as the channel which was in a way initiated by the state, and initially it was the only channel which was available, and how these kind of developments in the television sector, in the radio sector, in terms of providing the kind of communication to, or in the framework of not only providing the knowledge, because we find in the television programs and in the radio programs a lot of information was being provided, not only in the framework of the news, but also various kinds of programs which were there. They were providing a lot of information to the people, those who were in the agriculture sector or in other sectors. So we find that India was trying to train itself in various kinds of programs, and Indian National Committee for Space Research in 1962 was created to take up the space research and the space program as well. And India only could secure, or it only secured, the financial support from Soviet Union, which helped ISRO, Indian Space Research Organization, achieve aims such as establishing Thumba Equatorial Rocket Launching Station, launching the remote sensing satellites, developing India's first satellite Aryabhat, and sending astronauts into space. So we find that these kinds of developments during that time in the space program were also very exemplary, because in the later times we find that going of these remote sensing satellites, how they aid in providing information not only in the context of the environment, but at the same time in the framework of the defense. So the communication technologies which were developed during this period and later we find became some sort of building blocks, so that more and more development in these sectors could be taken up in the later times. We also find that how various IITs, they were being established, taking the help from the Soviet, West Germans or British, and how these IITs, they became some sort of important areas where when these IITs etc. they got established during this time. We find that apart from becoming a brand, the people, those who studied in the IITs, these people later became some sort of engines of growth, not only in the countries to which they went, but as alumnus or alumni of IIT, how they contributed to these IITs by providing a lot of grants to these institutions. And when the IITs received these kinds of grants from these institutions, then they invested that money in further development of the institution as well. And we also find that the roots of the nuclear power in India lie largely in the acquisition of the nuclear reactor technology from the various Western countries, particularly American support for the Tarapur atomic power station, and how India could also sustain its nuclear program after the aftermath of the Operation Smiling Buddha, which was the first in the context of the nuclear test. India was also there or played in some kind of a role in the framework of the defense research, where DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organization, was formed in 1958, and Krishna Menon as the defense minister took steps to initiate the defense research and development. So India was not only thinking in terms of various energy sectors, but also not only thinking in terms of agriculture and industrial growth, but also thinking in terms of defense research, and how India wanted that it should become more and more self-sufficient in this sector. And PC Mahalanobis in the framework of the Planning Commission also played an important role, where you have this Mahalanobis model and how the focus was on the capital goods during this time, not only on the consumer goods, but the capital goods, and that was the concern of the Mahalanobis model. But we also find that how when we see the kind of limitations, then how the non-utilization of the research which was undertaken, and how that research could not be put to the practical use, where more and more innovative technologies could have been developed. So that was one of the problems, because unless the research could be put to practical use, then it would not be helpful for the economy. And we also find that more effort, more money could have been pumped into scientific teaching and research in the universities at that point of time, and why this kind of a brain drain takes place. More opportunities could have been provided to the Indians, those who were those who could have been employed in India, and why they had to go to the developed world. So these kinds of things, they could have been taken up in a more practical manner, and these people could have been utilized for the growth of India. We also find that during this period how the people, those who were engaged in these kind of research, they were also in a way collaborating with the government in a way where they were not able to utilize the available resources with them to the best of the ability, and how technology could have been used. The way the research was being undertaken was one of the shortcomings, and we also talked about the green revolution, that how the green revolution technology dealing with the high yielding varieties that was being used, and how it was an important package, and because of which we also find that there was a lot of criticism because of the way chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and how more and more water that was being used. And over a period of time, we find that various agencies how they helped the government in terms of developing the green revolution agriculture as well as technology, and we find that in these kind of developments which were happening at this point of time, the government as well as the people from the science sector, they played an important role, and the focus of the government in terms of providing money through the planned expenditure, and the focus of the scientists in terms of carrying out various kinds of research, all of this led to the growth and development of India. Thank you very much.